up on this Tuesday edition of Newsline at noon, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says partnering up with Iran could be an option in containing the insurgency in Iraq, but the Pentagon rules out any military cooperation. President Park Geun-hye, in a meeting with Korean residents in Uzbekistan, promises all-out efforts to end abnormal practices and to revive the economy. Plus, Thomas Müller scores the first hat-trick of the 2014 World Cup as Germany beats Portugal 4-0. The U.S. secures a thrilling 2-1 victory over Ghana. These stories and more on Newsline at noon. It's noon Tuesday, June 17th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Eojin Chu.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this lunchtime, in a sign of the quickly deteriorating situation in Iraq, the U.S. government is reportedly considering working, in some extent anyway, with its traditional enemy, Iran.
Keeping all options on the table, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says anything constructive to providing Iraq with stability will be considered, and that includes airstrikes. Hyun-bin reports.
The United States could cooperate with its traditional foe, Iran, to stop Sunni militants, known as the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, from continuing their rampage through Iraq. In an interview with Yahoo News on Monday, Secretary of State John Kerry said that while Washington is not in active discussions with Tehran, it will not rule out anything constructive in providing stability to the region. Another U.S. official said the two sides could discuss the situation in Iraq on the sidelines of nuclear talks scheduled for Wednesday in Vienna. If it were to happen, cooperation between Washington and Tehran to contain the Iraqi crisis will mark the first time in more than a decade for the two countries to jointly undertake a common security purpose. Iran is a strong backer of the Shia government in Iraq and has signaled a readiness to cooperate with the U.S. to contain the crisis. Pentagon, however, made it clear that it will not engage with Iran on military activities in Iraq. As the situation spirals out of control, Kerry added that airstrikes are an option available to Washington, but no detailed plans on how to coordinate them have been drawn up yet. Meanwhile, President Obama on Monday has notified Congress that 275 U.S. troops will be deployed to Iraq to provide support and security for U.S. personnel and the American embassy in Baghdad. The troops are combat ready and will remain in Iraq until the security situation is brought under control. About 160 troops are already in the country, including 50 Marines and more than 100 Army soldiers. Radical militants from the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant have seized large parts of northern Iraq over the last several days, threatening to dismember Iraq and unleash all-out sectarian warfare. Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Now, on President Park's trip to Central Asia, on the first day of her state visit to Uzbekistan, the president met with Koreans and descendants of former Korean immigrants who were forcibly moved to Russia. She vowed to eradicate wrongful practices in Korean society and do her best in revitalizing the economy. Choi Woo-sun filed this report from Tashkent.
President Park Geun-hye has vowed to expand economic cooperation and boost ties with Central Asia. Meeting Koreans and the descendants of Korean immigrants in the Russian Far East in Tashkent on Monday, President Park promoted her initiative to link energy and infrastructure in Eurasia. Talking about connecting Uzbekistan's rich resources with Korea's advanced technologies, President Park said more jobs would be created in both countries. The Korean leader then promised policies to help hundreds of thousands of ethnic Koreans in Central Asia to more easily visit and find employment in Korea. She also said teaching Korean language, history, and culture to Korean Uzbeks was a national priority for her government. Asking for support for her proposed humanitarian and civilian-based exchanges with North Korea to better prepare for reunification, the South Korean president said she will, meanwhile, respond firmly to Pyongyang's provocative behavior.
저는 포기하지 않고 북한이 진정한 변화의 길로 나아갈 수 있도록 노력할 것입니다.
As for the recent ferry disaster in Korea, President Park said she will make good out of evil to revamp the national safety system.
비정상적인 관행과 문제들을 추상같이 바로잡고 경제 활성화의 불길을 살려서 세계 속에 자랑스러운 대한민국을 반드시 만들어 가겠습니다.
With the Eurasia Initiative high on her agenda, President Park is expected to seek to expand joint economic projects with Tashkent when she meets with Uzbek President Islam Karimov on Tuesday. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News, Tashkent.
And back here in Seoul, despite the firestorm surrounding President Park's pick for prime minister over controversial remarks he's made over the years, the presidential office plans to forge ahead with his nomination. A formal request calling for a confirmation hearing is expected to be submitted to the National Assembly later today. And as our Kim Young-gil reports, lawmakers are likely to make the process unpleasant for the prime minister-designate.
Prime Minister nominee Moon Chang-geuk's apology for controversial remarks he made years back about Japan's colonization of the Korean peninsula doesn't go far enough for the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, or NPAD.
Japan's colonization remains the biggest scar for the Korean people. We cannot nominate a prime minister who has a distorted view of history. If the government proceeds with the confirmation hearings, it will be criticized for lacking common sense.
Should the presidential office push ahead with Moon's nomination, some NPAD lawmakers say they would consider boycotting the confirmation hearing in protest. And the negative views of the prime minister nominee aren't reserved for the opposition party. 6 first-time lawmakers of the ruling Saenuri Party have issued statements calling for Moon to withdraw his nomination, while a number of more experienced lawmakers have openly criticized him. But the ruling party's full leader, Lee Wan-gu, plans to go ahead with the confirmation process.
There seem to be suspicions and doubts about the Prime Minister nominee, but the National Assembly has a duty to proceed with the confirmation hearing and evaluate whether the candidate is suitable.
The Prime Minister is the only cabinet post that requires parliamentary confirmation. Once the National Assembly receives a request calling for a confirmation hearing, which is likely to come Tuesday, they're required to hold one within 15 days. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
A civic group that fights on behalf of the victims of Japan's wartime system of sex slavery has delivered a petition to the United Nations to call for the prompt settlement of the highly emotive issue. The petition, organized by the Korean Council for Women drafted for sexual slavery by Japan, was signed by 1.5 million people from around the world. The civic group is expected to call for a resolution to the issue at the 26th session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva on this Tuesday. The group also plans to give a presentation highlighting the sheer brutality of Japan's military during and before World War II. Around 200,000 women, mostly Koreans, were forced into sexual slavery during Japan's colonial rule of Korea in the early 20th century. Now, the elder brother of the de facto owner of the sunken Sewol-ho ferry and an avid follower of Yoo Byung-un's cult were detained on Monday as prosecutors say they were likely to flee. Prosecutors say the brother, Yoo Byung-il, is suspected of embezzling consulting fees from the ferry operator Chonghae-jin Marine Company. Devotee Shin Myung-hee is suspected of helping Yoo Byung-un evade authorities. Earlier Monday, the trials for 8 close confidants to Yoo got underway at the western port city of Incheon. They stand accused of embezzlement, breach of duty and other charges related to the sinking. Most of the defendants denied the charges against them.
And as we continue on with our World Cup coverage, 3 more matches took place earlier today, including the big match between Germany and Portugal.
Certainly was a huge match. So to get an update on all of the matches and more from the 2014 Brazil World Cup, we're going to connect live to our SJ Lee standing by. Hello there, SJ.
Good afternoon to you guys. Now let's continue on with our 2014 Brazil World Cup coverage with a couple of matches that took place earlier today. This including, like you said, the highly anticipated matchup between Germany and Portugal in Group G. And now, while many expected a closer match between the two powerhouses, it was all Germany, as Thomas Müller got Germany on board early with a penalty in the 12th minute before Mats Hummels made it 2-0 in the 32nd. But just before the end of the first half, Thomas Müller scores once again, giving Germany the 3-0 lead in the first half. Now, Müller would then go on to score the first hat-trick of the tournament as Germany crushes Portugal 4-0. Meanwhile, later on the day, Iran taking on Nigeria. Both teams go scoreless as the first draw of the tournament happened with a 0-0 draw. And last but not least, USA versus Ghana in their Group G matchup. It only took 29 seconds for the first goal to be scored as Clint Dempsey gave USA the quick 1-0 lead. Ghana would then level it in the 82nd minute, but shortly after, John Brooks gives USA the 2-1 lead in the 86th minute and the win, 2-1, your final. Now on Tuesday, 6 p.m. local time, or Wednesday, 6 a.m. Korea time, South Korea goes on to face off against Russia for their first Group H match. Now, how does Russian side look going into the first match, and what are some things manager Hong Myung-bo needs to consider? So taking a look here, Russia has great chemistry, obviously, especially since all of their team members play in the domestic league. And as I've mentioned before, they have great defense. Now, Korea has a hard time scoring at the moment, so this will be a problem. Also, when it comes to the offense, Russia tends to score early, so for Korea, it's important that they focus early on. Now, of course, the weaknesses this time, they had a hard time defending on the headers, which means they need to capitalize on the corners and set pieces, and of course, they struggle with the short-range shooting as well. Now, also, while attacking from the wings is crucial for all the teams out there, they struggle with that, so it's important that Korea counters on these attacks from the sides. Now, one of the biggest concerns with the 2014 Brazil World Cup is obviously the summer heat and the kind of humidity players have to face. And while it wasn't that bad in most parts of Brazil, not the case in Manaus, where the Arena da Amazônia is. Now, as seen by the Italy-England match, many players were sluggish and had a hard time playing in the steamy conditions of Arena da Amazônia, where the temperatures were at 30 degrees Celsius and humidity at 61%. Now, despite the heat, FIFA officials decided not to give official breaks that would give players a chance to rest and rehydrate, since, according to the rules, it must be above 32 degrees Celsius for cool breaks to be considered. Meanwhile, 3 more matches are set to take place in Manaus. And now finishing things off with some fun news here that's been storming the internet. Now, everyone would agree that Robin van Persie's flying header against Spain in their 5-1 victory was amazing, but now it's become an internet sensation. Now, we've heard of T-bowing and planking, which was pretty big in the internet, but now Van Persieing is the new it thing on the internet, as people all around the world have been posting pictures of themselves lying face down on the ground and putting their head up just like Van Persie's goal. And while Van Persieing will eventually die out just like T-bowing and Bradying, one thing's for sure, it was a goal to remember. Well, that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day, and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Well, we're going to continue talking about the World Cup because everyone is terribly excited about it, including all the football fans around the world. But those of us here in Korea, we also have to stay up either very late or wake up extremely early to watch the big matches.
Right, that's because the time difference between Korea and Brazil, which is 12 hours, means the games aren't on at the most sociable hours, but that isn't stopping Seoul's expat community from getting behind their national side. Our Connie Lee has the story.
Cheers and applause burst out from soccer fans who aren't shy about showing their passion.
I painted my nails in German colors and kind of dressed red, black and white.
Show your earrings.
Oh yeah, and here.
A World Cup winning team is Brazil.
The 2014 World Cup is in full swing, and here in Korea, you not only see Team Korea fans making a statement, you see fans from all over the world packing the pubs and restaurants to watch the games.
Even though most of the World Cup matches are in the wee hours here in Korea, it's the love of the game that is bringing together the different people who are all rooting for their home country.
The atmosphere is here, good atmosphere, and the people who really enjoy the soccer and usually enjoy the hangout gather here, so it's fun.
A handful of venues are open into the early morning hours in downtown Seoul to accommodate those who want to watch the matches live and on the big screen.
Korea, the times aren't great for the World Cup games, but we had a lot of interest in the World Cup. A lot of people were emailing us and sending us messages on the Facebook page.
And it seems like if you're a true fan of soccer, it doesn't matter where you are or what time the games are on, you watch and support, even if that means going into work the next day a little tired.
Yes, it's a bad time for going to work tomorrow, but if you really want to support your team, your national team, then it doesn't matter how late it is, you just need to support them.
Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on NEWSLINE at Noon with Mark Broom and Jinju.
I'm Jinju.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about...
The value of Korea's stock market has fallen a notch compared to last year, settling as the world's 12th largest market. Now, why? Well, it's being partly attributed to the rise in the Indian market that is riding on the wave of so-called Modi-nomics. Hyun-bin tells us more.
The combined market capitalization of Korea's publicly listed companies crossed $1.2 trillion as of the end of last week. Citing Bloomberg data, Yonhap News reports that Korea took one step back from last year when its market was the 11th biggest in the world. Analysts say capital is flowing to other emerging economies in Asia, especially to India, where new Prime Minister Narendra Modi is pledging sweeping economic reforms. Thanks to his so-called Modi-nomics, India's benchmark Sensex has jumped 19% so far this year, with the total market value surging nearly 30%. Korea's main index, the Kospi, edged down 1% this year, and although total market capitalization went up by 4%, the actual increase will be lower because of the strengthening won. The Korean market currently makes up 1.9% of the global market. That's down 0.1 percentage points from last month and down 0.4 percentage points from August 2011, when it was at its highest. Experts say foreign buyers are moving their money away from Korea because they feel that Samsung Electronics, the major player on the Kospi, is not pushing for growth as strongly as they could. Another reason is said to be the weaker than expected performances by Korea's usual strongholds, the shipbuilding and petrochemical industries, which rely heavily on exports to China. Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
The International Monetary Fund has cut its growth forecast for the United States, citing a harsh winter that led to a weak first quarter. In its annual review of the U.S. economy, the IMF said it expects 2% growth this year, down from its 2.8% forecast in April. However, it did say it expects 3% growth next year. The IMF added the U.S. should cut spending and raise revenue in the long term, also suggesting the country raise its minimum wage to reduce the poverty rate, currently at 15%.
Now, we have a warning for you if you own a smartphone, because your text messages, call history, and pretty much anything else you're doing with your phones could, in fact, be under surveillance without you even knowing it. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
This smartphone has an application called mSpy installed on it. When the application is run, the messages and call history from the phone appear on the administrator's homepage. It reveals the current location of the smartphone, the phone's serial number, and mobile carrier. Phone conversations are even recorded.
그 위치가 어떻게 되죠?
네, 여기 종로구입니다. 그 위치가 어떻게 되죠?
These so-called spy applications have emerged as one of the newest problems for smartphone users, already wary of their privacy being invaded. Installing the application isn't that difficult either. After purchasing the application, you can install it secretly on a person's smartphone or send a smishing message that will install the application automatically. This will then keep track of the location of the smartphone, phone conversations, and even the user's activities on social networking services. The makers of such applications say they were developed to keep an eye on adolescent delinquents and to prevent the leaking of technologies. However, the applications are in fact being used to spy on employees or as a means to find out if the user is having an affair.
The hacker has full authority over a smartphone installed with the spy application. It can even lead to financial losses, as verification codes are sent to the phone when users make micropayments.
The application does not appear on the screen of your smartphone if installed secretly.
Users should not click on links of suspicious text messages. They should update the vaccines on their smartphones and check if their phones have been affected by malicious codes regularly.
With some 40 million smartphone users in Korea, there is a newfound sense of urgency to come up with technology that can counter such violations of privacy. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now we have another warning for you on Newsline at Noon, because you may not know this, but driving around with worn-out tyres can pose a serious risk to your health, and not only because of the obvious safety aspect. Latest research by Korea's Ministry of Environment has shown the amount of fine and ultra-fine dust particles emitted from old tyres in the Seoul metropolitan area alone is expected to reach between 1,000 to 2,000 tonnes a year by 2024. Just to give you an idea of how much this is, it's roughly half the amount emitted by construction work in the year 2007. The ministry says a diesel car puts out 5 milligrams of fine dust per kilometre, but driving with worn-out tyres over the same distance results in 20 times as much dust drifting into the atmosphere. In order to reduce the pollution factor, the ministry is planning to equip vehicles that drive long distances. So we're talking buses, taxis and trucks with special tyres.
And for a look through some of the other international headlines we're following this hour, we connect live to our Eunice Kim standing by at the news center.
So Eunice, Russian company Gazprom has cut its gas supply to Ukraine. This after a deadline on Monday passed without Kiev making a very long overdue payment.
That's right, Mark, and it marks an escalation of tensions between the two countries already entangled in incredibly strained relations. Now, the massive energy shutdown likely won't have a huge practical impact in the short term as it comes during the summer months versus the winter months, but it could disrupt gas supplies headed to the rest of Europe via Ukraine, despite Gazprom's assurances to the contrary. And in the big picture, it sets back reconciliation efforts between Ukraine and Russia even more. Of course, the Russian gas company also said it filed a lawsuit to recover Kiev's total outstanding gas debt of $4.5 billion. This as Ukraine is refusing to pay its debts in protest of an 80% price hike. Ukraine's Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk said the gas dispute with Russia was part of what he called a plan to destroy Ukraine. At least 50 people are dead in Kenya following a strike by Somali-linked Islamists in the coastal town of Peketoni. It happened Sunday night local time, and some were reported killed execution style in front of their families, while others were slaughtered during a World Cup screening. The Al-Shabaab group explained their assault as retaliation to Kenya's assassination of Muslim scholars and for sending its forces into Somalia. They warned Kenya was now officially a war zone and that tourists should visit the country at their own peril. Interior Minister Joseph Ole Lenku promised justice for the perpetrators before traveling to the area himself. And finally, the fifth round of negotiations on Tehran's nuclear program is underway in Vienna, as the current 6-month agreement between Iran and permanent members of the UN Security Council, plus Germany, is due to expire on July 20th. Now, earlier, U.S. State Department officials had expressed optimism that a nuclear deal could be struck by the deadline, but admitted that significant gaps remain on the acceptable limitations on Iran's nuclear program. Meanwhile, on the sidelines, Reuters reports high-ranking officials from Washington and Tehran met briefly to discuss the escalating insurgency in Iraq, though no specific outcome was achieved.
Well, thank you, Eunice. And those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Jinju and I will be back at the same time tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching.